For this video, I'm going to focus on the layout sketches and planes. Before I do that, I'm going to talk about some of the liberties I'm going to be taking with this bottle compared to the real Tide bottle design. If we look at the bottle in this area, from the top view, we see that we have a gentle curve here and then it severely curves just before it gets to the round label area. On the real bottle, this is just a gentle curve going all the way from this corner, sweeping around and coming to this corner. The general direction of the curve is in the Z direction, whereas here we see that this starts out in the Z direction, and by the time the curve gets to the cutout circle, it's going more in an X direction. Another liberty we will be taking is the shape of the handle when viewed from the top. On the real bottle, the handle is more curved in this area and then flatter in this area and then very curved again. The reason I've taken these liberties is I want to build a single boundary that will give us the overall shape of the bottle. From that boundary, we will be cutting out the circular opening for the label, and we will be building the label surface and all the handle surfaces. If I try to make the shape of the bottle exactly as it is on the real bottle, then in order to make this as a single boundary, this portion of the boundary here would have to be a gentle arc, then it would have to come way out and then back in again and then come into the area of the handle and then come out and then back in again. It would be a very complicated surface that might look good in some areas but probably would not look too good up here or down here. So this is why I'm cheating a little bit in order to simplify the design of this bottle. If I want to build an exact replica of the Tide bottle, I probably have to split this up into 4 quadrants and build this section, this section, this section, and this section all separately. That will probably take about 20 additional steps in the feature tree. So now I'm going to roll back to step 1 and we'll take a look at all the layouts. I'm purposely keeping all the dimensions in this front layout hidden because I've asked my students to measure their own bottles and build up the sketches completely on their own rather than giving them a starter file. I will tell you though that the circular cutout here is about 145 millimeters in diameter. The bottle seems to have 2 center lines. One center line is what the base is centered on, and the other center line is what the upper pour spout and neck are centered on. This circle is centered on the same center line that the base is centered on. The wide point of the bottle goes right through the center of the circle. This arc here is a simple 3-point arc with the widest point right here. This curve here is actually a spline with the widest point here, meaning that the spline control handles are going vertical in this location. On the real bottle, this point is the same distance from this center line as this point is, but I had to cheat a little bit and move this point out a little bit farther in order to get everything to look right. For this reason, I've dimensioned this point to this center line separately from the dimension of this point to this center line, rather than using a symmetrical relation. All of the details for the cap and this neck are symmetrical about this center line. Rolling forward to the next layout, I made a separate layout just for the handle details so that the front layout would not get too complicated. This arc is a simple 3-point arc. This portion of the handle opening is just offset from this arc, and this is a 3-point spline curving around and rejoining here. Rolling forward, I've made a middle plane that is passing through this point in my front layout sketch. Rolling forward again, I've made a plane for the neck, which is passing through this point in my layout sketch. Rolling forward again, take a look at the layout at the bottom of the bottle. Let's edit that layout. And this is a simple 3-point spline, 1, 2, 3. This point is aligned with the center line that passes through the circle. Looking at this from the top view, you see what I've done is added a dimension to these arrows here, and I made a linked dimension so that the length of these arrows is identical. These arrows are going vertical. These arrows at the center of the base are going horizontal. Another way to do this is just draw a 2-point spline from here to here, put a horizontal relation on the handle, and mirror that over to the other side. Either way will work. I only needed to draw 1/2 of this because we're going to be building only 1/2 the bottle and mirroring it, but you notice I added a dimension going from here to the center line and then doubled the distance off to this direction, which tells us, and here's another hint, that the bottle at the base is about 85 millimeters wide. Let's close that sketch. Now we're going to look at the layout on the middle plane, and this is going to be the most difficult layout to get correct. We need to get certain corner points of this curve aligned properly so that we have a nicely shaped bottle going through this area and also have a nice looking edge to the circular opening once it's cut out of the boundary. And I'll show you what I mean. I will temporarily roll this forward, and our goal is to make a nice smooth boundary, as we see here, that we are going to cut that circular opening out of for the label area. If we look at it from this view, this of course looks like a perfect circle. And if we look at it from this view, our goal is to have that edge have a nice gentle arc to it when viewed from this left side of the bottle. Let's take a look at the top view and see what's going on here. We have this surface going largely in a Z direction up in this area, and as we get toward the cutout area, that is going more in an X direction. Our goal is to have a surface which is running more in this direction where the circular trim cuts through. On the real bottle, this surface here is just a gentle arc which goes along this area here and goes straight to the cutout. So the general direction of the surface in this area is almost going in the Z direction. And that means that the direction of the trim and the direction of the surface are almost the same. So the trim and the surface are meeting at a very shallow angle. When that happens, small variations in the size of the trim or in the surface can cause large variations in the Z direction of the location of the edge. So if I were to make this circle just a little bit bigger, that edge could move back a dramatic amount. And I will demonstrate that by going to the sketch that's located on this middle plane. So we'll edit that, and here we see this curve is going at about 30 degrees, so it's going more this way than it is that way. So that's good for our purposes. But I'm going to change this to be similar to the real bottle. The real bottle looks more like this, where the surface is going much more in the Z direction than it is in the X direction. We'll finish that. And we have our trim here, which is fine. But if we look at this from the left side again, we see what's happening is that we don't quite have that gentle curve that we had before. It comes down gently and then very rapidly cuts into the bottle. This is because small variations in the surface can cause large variations in the location of the trim in this direction. We want to have a situation where small variations this way create small variations this way. Instead, what we have is a situation where small variations this way in this location of the cut or trim create large variations this way, and that's why this curve, when viewed from this direction, doesn't look very pleasing, and it is very unpredictable. So let's roll back and take a look at that sketch. And in fact, what I'm going to do is completely reconstruct the sketch here in the video rather than just simply show it to you. So we are going to be making our sketch on the middle plane. And when we make this sketch, we need to align with certain key areas. We need to align with this point, this side of the circular edge, this side of the circular edge, and also where this arc for the label area passes through our sketch plane. So to do this, I'll put in some vertical center lines. Put in one here, one here, and one here. And I'll add some relations. I'll make a pierce to this side of the circular edge here, a pierce to this circular edge here, and a pierce to this side of the circular edge here. Take a look at this more from the top view. I'll tweak this a little bit so you can see what the front view looks like at the same time. I don't normally like drawing multi-piece splines. I prefer to make one spline going all the way from this end to this end, but I think we might have a little bit better control of the spline if we do it in sections. So we'll do a section here to the edge of the circular opening, a section here which represents the label zone, a section here which represents the open area of the handle, and then this last portion here which is the outside surface of the handle, which is also part of the main boundary. So I'll start with a 2-point spline here going from this point to this point. Click on the spline, drag this handle out and make that vertical. And I know that the bottle in this area is about 70 millimeters wide, so I'll make this line 35 millimeters wide. And what I want to do is make sure that the surface right where it intersects with the circular opening is going more this way than it is going this way. So if I drag out my handle here, I want to make sure that the angle between this vertical is more than 45 degrees. If it's 90 degrees, it means the surface is going completely this way at this point, which is not going to be practical. So I'll drag this back a little bit, add a dimension, and I'll make that about 60 degrees. You might find yourself tweaking this later on when you make your boundary. And I'll drag this handle back a little bit to give this a more gentle sort of arc. So right at this point, this surface is going this way. Zooming out a little bit, we will be drawing the label zone here. It's about 40 millimeters to the center line of the bottle here. So I'll just put in 40 there. And draw another 2-point spline. I'll eventually make this tangent to this here, but I'll leave that alone for now. This area back here is where the handle is going to be. The handle is between 20 and 30 millimeters wide in this area, so half of that is 10 to 15 millimeters. So I'll just make this about 15. And I'll draw another 2-point spline going from here to here. And finally, the last piece is going to go from here to this point here. Tweak this spline here and drag out this handle and make that vertical. And let's look at this straight from the top. We need this to be in one nice, smooth, continuous shape. And we don't want any lumps or any reverse directions. We want it all kind of cupping upward. So we'll start out making this tangent to this and drag that back a little bit. Then we'll make this tangent to this and fiddle with our handles a little bit. And the last thing is to make this tangent to this. Now we can add some more dimensions to help us control the angles of these handles. When you piece together 2 splines and make them tangent, for whatever reason you can't drag the handles anymore, but you can add a dimension to them to change the orientation of the handles. These handles are already locked at the 60 degrees. So we'll zoom in here and add a dimension from here to this handle. I'm going to flatten this out by increasing this angle. So about 80 degrees should be good. Let's make that an even number. I'll make that about 78. And over at this end, I have another situation here where I want the handle to be as rounded as I possibly can. So I want the surface of the handle right at this point to be going a little bit more this way than it is that way. Meaning that this dimension here should be more than 45. If I don't want to go too much more, because what it does is it forces this curve to go backwards before curving back out again. So I'll make that 45 to start with, and I'll see if I can increase that angle just a little bit. So that looks pretty good. Then I can always play around with these handles a little bit to get this looking a little more smooth. And if I'm really brave, I can now try adding some equal curvature controls between here and here, here and here, and then finally from here to here. It's possible that I'll get some errors when that happens. The other thing I want to do is make sure that in this area where I'm going to be cutting out my label, that I have a nice generous radius here, because this is going to be blending with the boundary up in the neck area, and we don't want to have any kind of a pinch or crease that's going to go all the way from this middle plane up into the top area of our boundary. We want this radius here to just slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger until it flattens out in this area here. So what we can do, right click on this spline and go down to Show Minimum Radius. That shows us the radius of the spline at its minimum radius point, which just happens to be in this area. You see, if I fiddle around with these controls, dragging this handle here actually increases the radius here. So that's good. So it's very flat here, and then it gently arcs into this spot here. Or if I fiddle around with this handle here, you see what happens is this starts going backwards. That's bad, so I have to come back around here again and make that a little smaller. And I should be able to get a radius in this area that's somewhere between 10 and 15 millimeters. That will give me a nice smooth surface in this area that will look nice as it transitions up to here. Closing that sketch. I'm going to delete that sketch because I already have made this once before. Rolling forward, this is the actual sketch that's in my model here. And there's one last thing that I did put into the model, or the sketch rather, which was a simple circular arc here that goes from this point, which is aligned with my circular opening, and is going to this point in the opening for the handle. And I've got a vertical construction line that this arc is tangent to. So my handle is going to have this edge here for the inside surface and this side here for the outside surface. Over here I've put another arc. This end is aligned with my construction line here, so that brings it in alignment with this point on my circular arc. And I've made a pierce between this arc and this arc passing through my sketch plane. And again, I've made a vertical construction line and made this arc tangent to it. So this is going to be that surface where my main label surface ends, and it transitions to the opening for the handle. The very last thing is on my neck plane. I'll roll this forward. I have a very simple sketch that is nothing more than a circle with its center on this center line here, and one of the points coincident to either here or to here. That finishes all of my layout sketches. The remaining steps, even though there are quite a few, actually shouldn't be too difficult for this project. So concentrate on getting all of this just right before moving forward with the rest of the model. That concludes this video.